I am Marcus, a 32-year-old construction manager from Seattle who once had an unbreakable bond with my father. After losing my mom to cancer when I was 18, it was just the two of us against the world until Rebecca arrived. What started as an innocent family barbecue turned into the most humiliating day of my life, forcing me to walk away from the only family I had left. But 6 months later, my dad showed up at my door with tears in his eyes and a confession that changed everything. Before I continue this story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe if you have ever had to choose between family and self-respect. Growing up in Seattle, I was blessed with parents who made our middle-class neighborhood feel like paradise. My father, William, was a hard-working plumber who built his business from scratch, while my mother, Margaret, was a kindergarten teacher beloved by generations of kids. Our modest two-story home, with the blue shutters and wraparound porch, was always filled with laughter, board game nights, and the smell of Mom's incredible cooking. Everything changed during my senior year of high school, when Mom started experiencing severe headaches. What we initially dismissed as stress turned out to be stage 4 brain cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, but my warrior mother fought for almost a year before she finally lost her battle. I was 18, just weeks away from high school graduation when we held her funeral. Those first months without her were a blur of grief. Dad and I moved through our days like ghosts, eating takeout on the couch because neither of us could bear sitting at the dining table where Mom's chair remained empty. But slowly we found our rhythm. Dad threw himself into teaching me everything he knew about being a man in this world, from changing my oil to managing my first bank account. I postponed college for a year to help him with his business and to simply be there, neither of us ready to be alone. When I did start community college studying construction management, Dad came to every important event. He helped me move into my first apartment, celebrated when I landed my first internship, and beamed with pride at my graduation. Despite working 60-hour weeks, he never missed our Thursday night dinners or our monthly fishing trips to Lake Washington. 4 or 5 years after Mom died, it was just the two of us, and we developed the kind of father-son bond that most people only see in movies. We had inside jokes, could communicate with just a look, and knew exactly how to lift each other up during the tough days when missing Mom felt overwhelming. Dad kept the house exactly as Mom had left it, her gardening gloves still hanging by the back door, her favorite teacup still in the front of the cabinet. It was at Bellevue Home Improvement, where Dad was picking up supplies for a job, that he first met Rebecca. At 43, she worked in customer service and apparently went out of her way to help my father find some obscure plumbing part. He mentioned her in passing during our next dinner, describing her as helpful and knowledgeable. I thought nothing of it until she came up in conversation again the following week, and then again after that. I was genuinely happy when Dad sheepishly admitted he had asked her out for coffee. It had been 8 years since Mom passed, and while I knew no one could ever replace her, I had worried about my father spending the rest of his life alone. Mom would have wanted him to find companionship and joy again. So when he asked if I wanted to meet Rebecca for dinner, I immediately said yes. Our first meeting seemed promising. Rebecca was attractive for her age, with dyed blonde hair and an outfit that looked a bit too youthful, but she had a quick laugh and asked me thoughtful questions about my work and friends. She complimented Dad constantly and touched his arm in a way that made him blush like a teenager. I left thinking that, while she was quite different from my mom, who had been more reserved and intellectual, maybe her outgoing nature was exactly what Dad needed. What I did not expect was the whirlwind that followed. Within 4 months, Dad called to tell me they were engaged. I was stunned but supportive, congratulating him while silently wondering if this pace was wise. By month 7, they were married in a ceremony at a downtown hotel that bore no resemblance to the backyard garden wedding my parents had shared photos of, which had lined our hallway my entire life. The first changes were subtle. Dad started canceling our Thursday dinners, always with a reasonable excuse. Our fishing trips were postponed, then rescheduled, then forgotten altogether. When I would stop by the house, Rebecca was always there, somehow making me feel like I was interrupting, even though I had grown up in those rooms. Then came the physical changes to our family home. Rebecca convinced Dad to repaint the living room from Mom's favorite sage green to a stark white. The comfortable, worn-in furniture was replaced with modern pieces that looked stylish but felt unwelcoming. I bit my tongue telling myself that change was natural and that the house was Dad's to alter as he wished. The first real warning sign came about 3 months after their wedding. I stopped by on a Saturday to borrow Dad's pressure washer and found him looking upset in the garage. When I asked what was wrong, he admitted that Rebecca had done a deep clean of the house and had accidentally donated a box of Mom's personal items to Goodwill, including her journals and the sweater she was wearing in their honeymoon photos. I watched my father try to downplay his heartbreak, saying that Rebecca meant well and that it was probably time to let go of some things anyway, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know about how deeply this had wounded him. That night, I sat in my apartment wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe I was the one who needed to let go and allow Dad to move forward with his new wife. But something about Rebecca's increasing control over our family home and my father's life left me with a knot of unease in my stomach that I could not ignore. After the incident with my mother's belongings, I made a concerted effort to maintain our family connections by suggesting weekly Sunday dinners. Dad enthusiastically agreed, saying he missed our regular time together, but 3 Sundays in a row I received last-minute texts from him canceling our plans. First, Rebecca had surprised him with theater tickets. Then her sister was in town unexpectedly. The third time, he simply said Rebecca was not feeling well and they were staying in. When we finally did manage to have dinner together, Rebecca dominated the conversation, interrupting whenever Dad and I started reminiscing about old times or discussing my work projects. She would abruptly change the subject to her friends, her job, or home renovation plans. I noticed Dad looking at her before speaking as if seeking permission, a behavior completely foreign to my confident, self-assured father. One Saturday morning, I stopped by unannounced with coffee and Dad's favorite donuts, a tradition we had when I was growing up. Rebecca answered the door in a bathrobe, clearly annoyed by my presence. She reluctantly let me in, informing me that Dad was in the shower and they had plans for the day. While waiting, I wandered through the house and was shocked to discover that almost all the family photos had been removed from the walls. The gallery of frames that once lined the staircase, chronicling everything from my childhood sports games to family vacations, had been replaced with generic artwork and photos of Rebecca with friends. When I asked Dad about it later, he seemed uncomfortable, saying Rebecca thought the new arrangement made the house look more modern. The old photos were boxed up in the attic, he assured me, not thrown away, but I could see he was conflicted, caught between his new wife's desires and the memories we both cherished. About 8 months into their marriage, I discovered through a casual conversation with my uncle that Rebecca had convinced Dad to add her name to the house deed. This was the home my parents had saved for years to buy, where I had grown up and which Dad had always said would be mine someday. When I carefully broached the subject with him, he became defensive, saying it was the right thing to do for his wife and that I should not concern myself with their financial decisions. Thanksgiving that year marked another painful shift. 4 years after Mom died, I had taken over preparing her traditional recipes, keeping her memory alive through her famous cranberry orange relish and cornbread stuffing. I arrived at Dad's house with bags of groceries, only to find Rebecca had already prepared an entirely different menu. She had not consulted either of us, simply deciding that her family traditions would now be ours. Dad gave me an apologetic look, but said nothing as I unpacked my unused ingredients. As months passed, I began noticing that Dad was adopting Rebecca's opinions about various aspects of my life. He questioned my career path, suggesting I should aim for management positions more quickly, something I had never been interested in. He made comments about my girlfriend, Sophie, being too opinionated, echoing criticisms Rebecca had subtly voiced. He even criticized my apartment, my car choice, and my friend group, all with phrases that sounded suspiciously like Rebecca's manner of speaking. The most hurtful moment came unexpectedly when I stopped by one evening to drop off a book Dad had mentioned wanting to read. As I approached the side door, I overheard Rebecca on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was clear through the open window as she laughed and said, "The hardest part about this marriage is dealing with the baggage from the first one. especially the grown son who cannot cut the cord. I stood, frozen keys in hand, as she continued complaining about my presence in their lives. I quietly left, without making my presence known, the book still in my car. That incident made the next betrayal even more painful. Dad's 55th birthday was approaching, and we had always celebrated with a special dinner at his favorite steakhouse. I called to make reservations, only to discover from a mutual friend that Rebecca had organized a surprise party for him the previous weekend. She had invited their neighbors, her friends and colleagues from Dad's business, but somehow my invitation had been lost. When I confronted Dad about it, he seemed genuinely confused, saying Rebecca had told him she invited me, but I had declined due to work commitments. It was the first time I realized she was actively lying to create distance between us. My girlfriend, Sophie, who had known me since college and had been close to my father for years, was the first to explicitly name what was happening. As we drove home from yet another uncomfortable dinner, where Rebecca had dominated the conversation and made subtle digs at my life choices, Sophie turned to me and said, "Marcus, you know she's deliberately pushing you out of your dad's life, right? This is textbook isolation, and it's getting worse." Though I had felt it instinctively, hearing someone else validate my concerns made it impossible to ignore any longer. I decided to address it directly with Dad. I invited him to lunch, just the two of us at a diner halfway between our homes. For the first 20 minutes, glimpses of our old relationship shone through as we talked sports and work. But when I carefully brought up my concerns about feeling excluded and the changes in our relationship, his expression closed off. He listened silently, then sighed deeply. "Son, I think you are having trouble accepting that my life has changed," he said. "Rebecca makes me happy, and she feels you do not respect her role in my life." I tried explaining that I had no issue with him finding love again, but that I missed our traditions and felt deliberately pushed aside. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca asking when he would be home. The conversation was effectively ended, as he said he needed to get back, promising we would talk more another time. That talk never came. Instead, Dad suggested dinner at their house the following week with Rebecca present. What I had hoped would be an honest conversation turned into an ambush. When I tried again to express my feelings, Rebecca burst into tears, claiming I had never given her a chance and had been hostile from the beginning. Dad put his arm around her, shooting me a disappointed look that cut deep. He accused me of being unwelcoming and selfish, unable to be happy for his second chance at love. I left that dinner feeling like I was losing my mind. Had I been unreasonable all along? Was I the problem? The gaslighting had me questioning my own perceptions, despite the clear pattern of behavior I had witnessed. Driving home, I realized I was facing an impossible choice between maintaining a relationship with my father and protecting my own mental health from Rebecca's manipulations. I had no idea that the annual 4th of July barbecue would force that decision to a breaking point. The 4th of July barbecue at our family home had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. Even after Mom passed, Dad and I maintained it as a way to bring together extended family, neighbors, and friends for a day of good food and reminiscing. It was one of the few times each year when the house felt alive with the same energy it had when Mom was still with us. This year, despite the growing tension with Rebecca, I was determined to keep the tradition alive. I arrived at the house at 10 o'clock in the morning, 3 hours before guests were expected, arms full of groceries and Mom's old recipe cards. The familiar drive up to the house felt different immediately. The front garden, which Dad had meticulously maintained as a tribute to Mom's love of gardening, had been completely redone with stone paths and modern landscaping that bore no resemblance to the colorful flower beds she had cherished. I used my key to enter through the side door, calling out a greeting. Rebecca appeared from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, her expression making it clear my early arrival was unwelcome. "William did not mention you would be here so early," she said, her tone suggesting I had violated some boundary. "We always start the prep around 10 o'clock, I explained, moving toward the kitchen. "Dad should be expecting me." Dad emerged from the basement, carrying folding chairs. His face brightened momentarily when he saw me, then quickly shifted to a cautious smile, his eyes darting to Rebecca as if gauging her reaction. "Marcus, good to see you," he said, his voice overly cheerful. "I guess we can get started on the food prep." I unpacked the groceries, including the ingredients for Mom's famous potato salad, a dish that had been a highlight of every family gathering. As I began washing potatoes at the sink, Rebecca hovered nearby, watching with obvious disapproval. "I already planned the menu," she said flatly. "I have a premium potato salad from Whole Foods in the refrigerator." Dad quickly intervened, his voice unnaturally bright. "We can have both. More options are always better, right?" Rebecca's lips thinned, but she said nothing more, disappearing upstairs while Dad and I continued preparations. For a brief moment, it felt like old times as we worked side by side, marinating meats and chopping vegetables. But there was a new tension in Dad's shoulders, and he kept checking his watch, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the stairs. By noon, the backyard was transformed with red, white, and blue decorations. The grill was heating up, and the side tables were laden with appetizers. I had just finished arranging Mom's hand-painted serving dishes when Rebecca reappeared, now dressed in a flashy sundress and full makeup. "I bought new serving platters for today," she announced, holding up sleek, modern dishes. "These old things do not match the theme I planned." Without waiting for a response, she began removing Mom's dishes, replacing them with her own. I felt my jaw tighten, but stayed silent, Dad's pleading glance conveying his desire to avoid conflict. This was just the beginning of Rebecca's campaign to erase every trace of Mom's influence from the gathering. Guests began arriving around 1 o'clock. My cousins, Jake and Amy, who had grown up alongside me at these BBQs, gave me sympathetic looks as Rebecca loudly directed everyone to the designated seating areas she had arranged. My childhood friend Connor and his wife arrived next, followed by a stream of neighbors and work associates. Sophie came last, looking beautiful in a summer dress, giving me a supportive squeeze of the hand as she helped carry drinks to the yard. Dad manned the grill, as he always had, one of the few traditions Rebecca had not managed to alter. I circulated among guests, many of whom pulled me aside to quietly ask about the changes to the house or to reminisce about past gatherings. Several mentioned how different the atmosphere felt, their eyes darting to Rebecca as she held court near the drinks table. As the afternoon progressed, Rebecca's wine glass was refilled frequently. Her laugh grew louder, her gestures more dramatic. She inserted herself into every conversation, often talking over others or redirecting discussions to herself. Dad watched her nervously from the grill, his usual relaxed barbecue demeanor replaced with vigilant monitoring of his wife's increasing intoxication. The first direct confrontation came when Sophie offered to help serve the side dishes. She was carrying a bowl of coleslaw to the buffet table when Rebecca bumped into her, spilling red wine down the front of Sophie's white dress. "Oh my," Rebecca exclaimed, not sounding particularly sorry. "You should be more careful about where you're standing. And really, white is such an impractical color for an outdoor event." Sophie handled it with grace, assuring everyone it was fine as she dabbed at the stain, but I saw the hurt in her eyes at Rebecca's backhanded criticism. I guided Sophie inside to help clean up, whispering apologies for Rebecca's behavior. "It is not your fault," Sophie assured me, but her expression was troubled. "How does your dad not see what she is doing?" I had no answer for her. When we returned outside, the tension in the air was palpable. Several guests were exchanging uncomfortable glances as Rebecca dominated a conversation about home renovations, dismissing everyone else's input. Dad was flipping burgers, his eyes fixed on the grill, deliberately avoiding the situation. We made it through dinner without further incident, though Rebecca made sure to loudly praise her store-bought potato salad, while ignoring the fact that most guests had taken generous portions of Mom's recipe that I had prepared. I was starting to think we might actually survive the day when Rebecca clinked her glass with a fork standing up to make an impromptu toast. "I want to thank everyone for coming to my first 4th of July as the lady of this house." She began emphasizing her new status. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. What started as a seemingly innocent thank you speech quickly veered into inappropriate territory. "I especially want to thank Marcus for finally giving us some space after hovering around William," since I moved in," she said, her words slightly slurred. "Did you all know? He used to call his father every single day, sometimes twice." William and I joked that he was the neediest grown man we had ever met. A shocked silence fell over the gathering. I felt my face burning as every eye turned toward me. Dad stared at his plate, saying nothing to contradict this humiliating characterization. Rebecca continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "And now he is a big-shot construction manager, though William tells me he would have been promoted years ago if he had any real ambition. Still driving that old Honda too, even though his father offered to help him buy something more appropriate for a professional." This was an outright lie. I had never wanted financial help from Dad, having worked hard to establish my independence. The fact that she was rewriting our history while Dad sat silently was beyond painful. "Of course, we all know why Marcus cannot keep a girlfriend too." Rebecca went on, winking conspiratorially at the group. "The last one before Sophie here lasted what, 3 months? And the one before that left him for his friend. William, and I think it is because he still expects every woman to be like his mother, cooking and cleaning and never having enough of an opinion." I glanced at Sophie, whose face was a mask of shock and anger. My cousins were staring open-mouthed at Rebecca, while Connor looked ready to intervene, but it was the look on Dad's face that truly broke something inside me. He was staring down at his plate, his shoulders hunched, making no move to stop his wife's cruel monologue. In that moment, I realized he had made his choice, and it was not me. "Oh, do not look so serious, everyone," Rebecca laughed, raising her glass higher. "We all know Marcus is just jealous that he has to share his daddy now. Cheers to family drama." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the patio stones. Every eye was on me, waiting for an explosion of anger or a scene to match Rebecca's inappropriate display. Instead, I quietly placed my napkin on the table. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. "Please enjoy the rest of your evening." I walked calmly into the house, gathered my keys and phone, and headed for the front door. I could hear murmuring from the backyard, the party atmosphere completely deflated. As I reached my car, I heard Dad call my name, his voice lacking the conviction it should have carried in that moment. "Marcus, wait," he said, standing on the front path. She did not mean it like that. "She has had too much to drink." I turned to face him, suddenly exhausted. "That is your excuse? She has had too much to drink? She just humiliated me in front of everyone we know, and you sat there and let it happen." "She is trying to fit in," he said weakly. "It is hard for her to come into an established family." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "She's not trying to fit in, Dad. She's trying to push me out, and you are letting her do it." "That is not fair," he protested, but his eyes could not meet mine. "What is not fair is watching you become someone I do not recognize anymore. Mom would be heartbroken to see this." It was a low blow bringing Mom into it, but in that moment the pain overrode my better judgment. Dad flinched as if I had slapped him. "Marcus, please," he began, but I was already getting into my car. "Call me when you remember who you are," I said, closing the door and driving away, my last image of him standing alone in the driveway, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. As I drove, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Sophie, Connor, and my cousins, all expressing outrage at Rebecca's behavior and concern for me. But there was nothing from Dad, not that night, not the next day. His silence told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in his new life. The week following the barbecue disaster was one of the most difficult of my life, second only to when we lost Mom. I called in sick to work for 2 days, unable to face colleagues or focus on projects, while replaying Rebecca's words and Dad's silent complicity over and over in my mind. Sophie came over both evenings bringing dinner and sitting with me as I processed what had happened. My phone was flooded with supportive messages from those who had witnessed Rebecca's speech. My cousin, Jake, called to tell me several guests had left immediately after I did, disgusted by the display. Connor stopped by with beer and assured me I had nothing to be embarrassed about, that everyone saw the situation for what it was. On the third day, a text finally came from Dad. "Rebecca feels terrible about what happened. She was just nervous and drank too much. Can we all sit down and talk this through?" No acknowledgement of his own failure to intervene. No personal apology. Just another excuse for Rebecca and a request that I once again be the bigger person. I did not respond. Two more texts followed over the next few days, each making it clear that any reconciliation would include Rebecca and require me to accept her version of events. The final one read, "Son family means accepting people's flaws. Rebecca is part of our family now." That was the message that crystallized my decision. Dad had redefined family to exclude my feelings and boundaries. For my own mental health, I needed to create distance until he could see what was happening. I spent the weekend apartment hunting, finding a one-bedroom unit across town, closer to my job site, and far enough from Dad's neighborhood that I would not risk running into them. The rent was higher than I wanted, but the space was clean and modern, with big windows and a small balcony where I could grill. The following Saturday, I checked Dad's social media and saw he had posted about a weekend trip to a coastal town with Rebecca. It was the perfect opportunity to retrieve my remaining belongings from his house. I still had a key, and while part of me felt strange about entering when they were away, I could not face another confrontation with Rebecca. Entering the house was like visiting a museum of my former life. I moved quietly through rooms now decorated to Rebecca's taste, gathering the boxes of childhood memorabilia from the attic, sports trophies from the garage shelves, and a few photos of Mom that had survived Rebecca's redecorating purge. In my old bedroom, now converted to a home office, I found a handmade quilt Mom had created for my 16th birthday, stuffed in the back of the closet. I took that too, along with the fishing gear I had stored in the garden shed. The last item I collected was the small wooden box on Dad's dresser containing the watch Mom had given him on their 20th anniversary. I did not take it, but I opened it to make sure it was still there, relieved to find it intact. As I closed the box, I noticed a framed photo on Dad's nightstand that Rebecca had apparently not removed, a snapshot of Dad and me from a fishing trip the year after Mom died. Both of us smiling despite the grief still evident in our eyes. The fact that he had kept this one photo gave me a glimmer of hope that the father I knew was still in there somewhere. I left my house key on the kitchen counter with a brief note. Took my remaining things. Wish you both well. No drama, no accusations, just a clean break. The first month in my new apartment was both liberating and painfully lonely. I immersed myself in work, taking on additional projects that kept me at job sites until late in the evening. On weekends, I explored my new neighborhood, finding a local coffee shop where the baristas soon knew my order and a small park where I could read on Sunday mornings. Sophie was my rock during this time, spending most evenings at my place and helping make it feel like home. We hung artwork, assembled furniture, and created new routines that slowly filled the void left by the family traditions I had lost. Connor organized weekly poker nights with our friend group, ensuring I remained socially connected despite my instinct to isolate myself. Dad's texts became less frequent. Thinking of you. Hope work is going well. Always casual, never addressing the elephant in the room. I responded with equally surface-level updates, unable to pretend everything was normal, but not wanting to sever the connection entirely. In September, 2 months after the barbecue, I received a promotion at work, taking on a larger project as lead manager. The increased responsibilities and salary were welcome distractions, giving me a sense of purpose and progress in my professional life, while my personal life remained in limbo. When Dad texted to suggest meeting for lunch, I agreed, hoping for a meaningful conversation. Instead, he spent the hour making small talk about sports and were carefully avoiding any mention of Rebecca or our estrangement. When I directly asked how things were at home, he gave vague assurances that everything was fine before quickly changing the subject. What struck me most was how tired he looked, with new lines around his eyes and a certain dullness to his usually vibrant personality. As the holidays approached, the estrangement became more painful. Thanksgiving had always been a major family event, and the thought of spending it without Dad was almost unbearable. I invited him to join Sophie and me, making it clear in my message that we would love to have him. His response came a day later. Thanks for the invitation, but Rebecca has already planned dinner with her family. Maybe we can do something the following weekend. That something never materialized. Instead, I spent Thanksgiving with Sophie's family, grateful for their warmth, but acutely aware of the empty space beside me where Dad should have been. Similarly, Christmas loomed as another reminder of our fractured relationship. When a Christmas card arrived, signed by both William and Rebecca, with a generic message that could have been sent to a casual acquaintance, I placed it on my mantle with a mixture of sadness and resignation. Through my cousin Amy, I heard that Dad seemed withdrawn at family functions, letting Rebecca dominate conversations while he sat quietly, a shell of his former sociable self. She also mentioned that he had canceled his annual fishing trip with my uncles, something he had never missed, even in the year following Mom's death. As a new year began, I settled into my independent life, finding a balance between acceptance of the current situation and hope for eventual reconciliation. I had stopped expecting Dad to suddenly see through Rebecca's manipulation, but I kept the door open through occasional texts and updates, letting him know I was still here when he was ready to truly talk. What I did not know then was that behind the scenes, a crisis was building that would force us both to confront the reality of what Rebecca had done to our family, and that the Dad I remembered was fighting his way back to the surface in ways I could not yet see. It was nearly 6 months after the barbecue incident on a Tuesday night in January when everything changed. I was reviewing project blueprints at my kitchen table, a basketball game playing quietly on the television, when a thunderous knocking shook my apartment door. It was almost 11 at night, far too late for any expected visitor. Cautiously peering through the peephole, I was shocked to see my father standing in the hallway. He looked nothing like the put-together man I had grown up admiring. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and he was leaning against the doorframe, as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. I immediately threw open the door. "Dad, what happened? Are you okay?" He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes, his face haggard in a way that added 10 years to his appearance. "Marcus," he said, his voice cracking, "I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" I stepped aside, concern overwhelming any lingering resentment. Dad shuffled into my apartment, glancing around at the space he had never visited, despite my having lived there for months. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my living room until I guided him to the couch. "Can I get you something? Water, coffee?" He shook his head, then changed his mind. "Actually, water would be good. Thank you." When I returned with the glass, I found him with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I had only seen my father cry once before at Mom's funeral, and the sight of him breaking down in my living room sent a chill through me. "Dad, you are scaring me. What is going on?" He took the water with trembling hands, took a sip, and then set it down carefully on the coffee table. "I have been such a fool. Marcus," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Such a goddamn fool." "What happened?" I asked again, sitting beside him. "It is Rebecca," he said, meeting my eyes for the first time. She has been stealing from me. From us." This was not what I had expected to hear. "Stealing? What do you mean?" Dad pulled a folded stack of papers from his jacket pocket, spreading them on the coffee table with shaking hands. "I found these yesterday hidden in her desk drawer while looking for stamps. Bank statements from accounts I never knew existed, transfers from our joint accounts, from my retirement fund, from the home equity line of credit I never remembered opening." I leaned forward to examine the papers. They showed systematic transfers ranging from $2,000 to $15,000, moving from my father's accounts to unknown destinations. The total at the bottom of Dad's handwritten calculations was staggering, $175,823. "I confronted her last night," Dad continued, his voice hollow. "She denied it first, then claimed it was for investments she was making for our future. But when I pressed her when I demanded to see these investments, his voice broke again. She laughed at me. Marcus actually laughed and said I was too trusting for my own good. My mind was reeling, trying to process this information. "Have you gone to the police?" "Not yet." After she laughed, I started doing some research, called in a favor from my old client who works at the bank. Dad pulled out another paper. Rebecca Wilson, or sometimes Rebecca Davis, or sometimes Rebecca Keller. 3 different identities, 3 previous marriages, all to men recently widowed or divorced, all ending with significant financial losses for the men involved. The sick feeling in my stomach intensified as the full picture emerged. Dad had not just been manipulated emotionally, he had been the target of a practice con artist who had done this before. When I confronted her with what I had learned, she did not even deny it. She said, Dad's voice caught. She said I was an easy mark, lonely old man, so desperate for companionship. I never asked the right questions, never verified her background, never insisted on a prenup. The shame in his voice was palpable. She had been planning this from the day we met. I was stunned into silence, processing the magnitude of this betrayal while watching my strong, capable father crumble before my eyes. But the worst part, Dad continued after gathering himself. The absolute worst part is what she told me about you. My heart sank. What about me? She admitted she had been deliberately driving a wedge between us from the beginning. Said you were the only threat to her plan because you were watching out for me, noticing things. So she had to make me doubt you, make me think you were just jealous and unsupportive. Tears flowed freely down Dad's face now. And I believed her, Marcus. I chose her over my own son. I let her isolate me from the one person who was actually trying to protect me. The anger I expected to feel did not come. Instead, seeing my father so thoroughly broken, I felt only a profound sadness and an unexpected protectiveness. Where is she now? Does she know you are here? Dad wiped his face with his sleeve. That is another thing. When I left for work this morning, everything seemed normal. She acted like our confrontation never happened. But when I got home tonight, the locks had been changed. My key would not work. I could see her through the window packing suitcases. She saw me standing there and just waved like it was some kind of joke. She locked you out of your own house. I was incredulous. Our house, Dad corrected bitterly. Remember how I added her to the deed? Another brilliant move on my part. I cannot even legally force my way back in without a court order. The full weight of the situation settled over us both. Dad had not just lost his money. He had potentially lost his home, his sense of security, and his dignity, and he had nowhere to go but to the son he had pushed away. I know I have no right to ask this, he said, staring at the floor, especially after everything that has happened, but I have nowhere else to go tonight. Could I possibly stay here until I figure out my next steps? The vulnerability in his question, so unlike the father who had always been my rock, made my decision immediate. Of course you can stay here, Dad, as long as you need to. Relief washed over his exhausted face. I do not deserve your kindness, son. Maybe not. I agreed quietly, but you're going to get it anyway because that is what family really means. I set him up on the couch with sheets and a pillow, found him an unused toothbrush, and offered a clean t-shirt to sleep in. As I turned to head to my own bedroom, Dad caught my arm. I am so sorry, Marcus, for everything. For not believing you, for letting her come between us, for sitting there at that barbecue while she humiliated you. His voice broke again. I do not know if you can ever forgive me, but I need you to know that I see it all clearly now, and I am ashamed of the man I became with her. I squeezed his shoulder, emotions too complex for words. We will talk more tomorrow, Dad. Try to get some sleep. As I lay in bed that night, listening to my father's restless movements in the living room, I processed the shocking revelations. Rebecca had not just been difficult or controlling, she had been running a calculated con from the beginning. And while part of me wanted to say, I told you so, the broken man on my couch needed support more than recrimination. The road ahead would be complicated, involving lawyers, police reports, and painful admissions. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had my real father back, even if he was currently at his lowest point. Tomorrow would be time enough to figure out how to fight back against Rebecca's schemes. Tonight, it was enough to know that the wall between us had finally crumbled, forced down by circumstances neither of us could have predicted, but perhaps creating space for something stronger to be rebuilt in its place. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and found Dad, already dressed in yesterday's clothes, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open in front of him. The dark circles under his eyes told me he had barely slept. I hope you do not mind, he said, gesturing to the computer. I have been researching what to do in cases of financial fraud by a spouse. It is complicated. I poured myself coffee and sat across from him. We need professional help with this, Dad. I have a friend from college, Jessica, who practices family law. Let me call her. Dad nodded gratefully. I do not even know where to begin. The bank accounts, the house, the divorce. It is overwhelming. Jessica agreed to meet us for lunch that day, bringing along a colleague who specialized in financial fraud. Over sandwiches at a quiet cafe, they outlined the challenging process ahead. First priority was documenting every unauthorized transaction and filing police reports for the clearest cases of fraud. Next would be emergency motions regarding the house, followed by divorce proceedings. The good news, Jessica explained, is that marriage fraud is taken seriously by the courts. The bad news is that, with her name on the deed and accounts untangling, everything will take time. Dad listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. I saw glimpses of his old self, the methodical problem solver I had grown up admiring. When the lawyers left promising to file initial paperwork that afternoon, Dad turned to me with determination in his eyes. I need to confront her directly, Marcus. Not just about the money, but about everything she has done. I need to look her in the eye when I tell her our marriage is over. I was hesitant. Are you sure that is wise? The lawyers advised minimal contact. This is not about legal strategy, Dad insisted. This is about reclaiming my dignity. I let this woman manipulate me, turn me against my own son, and make me question my judgment. I need to stand up to her for my own self-respect. Seeing his resolve, I suggested a compromise. Then I am coming with you, and we are recording everything for legal protection. The drive to Dad's house that afternoon was tense. We had formulated a plan. I would wait in the car, initially recording on my phone, while Dad attempted to speak with Rebecca. If she refused to engage or things escalated, I would join him as backup. To our surprise, Rebecca answered the door immediately when Dad knocked, smiling as if nothing was amiss. She was impeccably dressed and made up not looking like someone in the midst of fleeing with stolen money. "William, darling," she purred. "Have you calmed down from your little tantrum yesterday?" Dad's voice was steady as he replied, "I am not here to argue, Rebecca. I am here to tell you that I have filed police reports about the financial fraud and will be filing for divorce this week." Her expression did not change, the smile remaining fixed in place. Fraud? What a dramatic accusation. I was simply managing our finances like any good wife. Good wives do not drain retirement accounts and home equity without their husband's knowledge, Dad countered. Good wives do not have multiple identities and a history of defrauding other men. At this, her smile finally faltered. "You have been busy with your little investigation. And who has been filling your head with these absurd theories?" "Your precious son, I assume." She glanced toward the car, spotting me. "I see he is here too. How touching." That was my cue. I exited the car and joined Dad on the front step phone, visibly recording. Rebecca's eyes narrowed at the device. "Is that really necessary? Family matters should be private. This stopped being a family matter when you started stealing." I replied evenly. Rebecca's facade cracked further. "You have always been the problem, Marcus. Things were going perfectly until you started poisoning your father against me." Dad stepped forward, his voice gaining strength. "No, Rebecca, you're the one doing the poisoning. You deliberately tried to destroy my relationship with my son because he could see through you. I was just too blind to notice. You were lonely and pathetic." She snapped her charming mask, completely gone now. "So grateful for attention. You never question anything. At least the others put up more of a fight before I cleaned them out." The confession, now captured on video, seemed to surprise even Rebecca. She quickly tried to backtrack. "That is not what I meant. You are twisting my words." "We both know exactly what you meant," Dad said firmly. "I want you out of my house by the end of the week. My lawyers will be in touch about the rest." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Your house? My name is on the deed, William, and good luck proving those transfers were not gifts." I have been very careful. Not careful enough. I interjected, thinking of the bank statements and the recording we now had. The police take marriage fraud seriously, especially when there is a pattern across multiple victims. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Rebecca's face. "You are bluffing." Dad shook his head. "We have already spoken with the two ex-husbands who were willing to come forward. They described your methods in detail, how you isolated them from family, added yourself to property deeds, then drained accounts before disappearing. Sound familiar? This was partially a bluff, as we had only found names, not made contact yet, but Rebecca's reaction told us we had hit the mark. "Get off my property," she hissed, "both of you." "Gladly," Dad replied. "But remember, the police now have an active fraud investigation. I would not recommend trying to leave the state." As we walked back to the car, I heard the door slam behind us. Dad let out a long breath, his hands shaking slightly. "That was even harder than I expected." "You did great," I assured him, and we got her admission on record. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The police took Dad's case seriously, especially after we located one of Rebecca's previous husbands who was willing to give a statement about her similar tactics with him. A sympathetic judge granted an emergency order freezing the joint accounts to prevent further withdrawals. The battle over the house was more complicated due to Rebecca's name on the deed, but her recorded admission of fraud strengthened our position. Throughout this process, Dad stayed on my couch, gradually bringing more of his belongings to my apartment. As it became clear the legal battle would be lengthy, we fell into a routine of sorts, carpooling to work in the mornings, meeting with lawyers in the evenings, and slowly rebuilding our relationship during quiet moments in between. At my suggestion, Dad began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping victims of manipulation and financial abuse. Initially resistant, he eventually embraced the process, coming to understand how Rebecca had exploited his grief and loneliness following Mom's death. The therapist says I was a textbook target. He explained one evening, as we prepared dinner together, widowed, financially stable, emotionally vulnerable, Rebecca spotted me from a mile away. "That does not make it your fault," I reminded him. "But I should have listened when you raised concerns," he insisted deep down. I think I knew something was wrong. I just wanted so badly for it to work that I ignored all the warning signs. 3 months into the legal battle, we received our first major victory. Based on the evidence of fraud, the judge ordered Rebecca to vacate the house pending final property settlement. Dad and I drove over together the day after she left, unsure what we would find. The house was in disarray, with obvious gaps where valuable items had been removed. Many of the new furniture pieces were gone, likely sold or moved to storage. But surprisingly, in the attic we discovered boxes of family photos and keepsakes that Rebecca had claimed were accidentally donated, hidden away instead of discarded. As Dad held Mom's old photo albums, tears welled in his eyes. "She cannot even let me have these memories." "What kind of person does that?" "The kind who is empty inside," I said, putting an arm around his shoulders. "But she's gone now, and we can start putting things back together." Over the next several weekends, we worked to restore the house. We repainted the living room back to Mom's favorite sage green. We rehung family photos in the hallway. We replanted her garden with the perennials she had loved. With each change, the house felt more like the home I remembered and less like Rebecca's sterile showcase. 6 months after Dad appeared at my door that January night, we received news that the prosecutor was bringing criminal charges against Rebecca based on evidence from our case and 2 previous victims. Most of Dad's money would never be recovered, as she had transferred much of it overseas or converted it to cash. But the validation of criminal charges brought a sense of justice that was worth more than the financial loss. "I never thought I would say this," Dad told me as we sat on the porch swing he had reinstalled. "But in some ways I am grateful this happened. Grateful for being defrauded and manipulated." He nodded thoughtfully, not for that part, but for the wake-up call, for the chance to rebuild what really matters. He looked at me meaningfully. "I almost lost you. Marcus almost threw away the most important relationship in my life for someone who never cared about me at all. But you did not lose me," I assured him. "We are here now, and we are okay." And as we sat together on that porch swing, watching the sunset over the neighborhood where I had grown up, I realized it was true. We were okay, different, certainly changed by what we had experienced. But the essential bond between us had survived, tempered by fire into something perhaps even stronger than before. 1 year after Dad showed up at my apartment door, with his world shattered, we sat together on the refurbished deck of the family home, grilling steaks for Sunday dinner. The legal proceedings against Rebecca were ongoing, with a trial date set for the following month, but we had both reached a point where her name no longer dominated our conversations or haunted our thoughts. Sophie called earlier. Dad mentioned flipping a steak with the practiced ease of someone who had hosted countless backyard barbecues. She wanted to know if we need anything for the 4th of July party next weekend. I smiled, thinking of how far we had come since the disastrous barbecue that had driven us apart. I told her we have everything covered, but she insists on bringing her apple cobbler. Smart man never turned down that cobbler. Dad laughed, the sound genuine and unreserved, something I had feared I might never hear again. The past 6 months had been a journey of rebuilding, not just the physical spaces Rebecca had altered, but the emotional connection that had been the foundation of our family. Through countless honest, sometimes painful conversations, Dad had taken full responsibility for his blindness to Rebecca's manipulation and his failure to stand up for me. I let fear drive my decisions, he admitted during one of our earlier heart-to-hearts. Fear of being alone, fear of losing what I thought was a second chance at happiness. But real happiness cannot be built on lies or at the expense of the people who truly love you. For my part, I had learned to forgive without forgetting to accept Dad's apologies, while maintaining the healthy boundaries I had established during our estrangement. Our relationship now felt more balanced, a partnership of equals rather than the parent-child dynamic that had persisted well into my adulthood. Dad had faithfully attended therapy sessions, joining a support group for victims of relationship fraud, where he found community with others who understood his experience. Initially, hesitant to share his story, he eventually became a vocal member, even mentoring newcomers still reeling from similar betrayals. The most important thing I learned, he told me after one particularly impactful session, is that being victimized does not make you weak, it makes you human. The strength comes in how you recover and what you learn from it. This new wisdom extended to his approach to relationships when his friend Linda from the hardware store expressed interest in more than friendship. Dad was transparent about his experience with Rebecca and his ongoing recovery. Rather than rushing into romance, they built a foundation of genuine friendship, meeting for coffee or walks in the park, with Dad maintaining clear financial boundaries from the beginning. My relationship with Sophie had also deepened through the crisis. Her unwavering support during both the estrangement and the reconciliation showed me what true partnership looked like. We had recently started discussing our future in more concrete terms, looking at houses not far from Dad's neighborhood. The restoration of the family home became a physical manifestation of our healing process. We had kept some of the updates that genuinely improved the space, but returned the elements that made it distinctly ours. Mom's garden flourished once again, her recipe card were back in the kitchen drawer, and, most importantly, her presence was acknowledged rather than erased. Photos of our family, including Mom, once again lined the hallway, now joined by newer images that reflected our current lives. I have been thinking, Dad said, bringing me back to the present moment on the deck, about what to say at the trial if I'm asked to give a victim impact statement. I nodded, giving him space to continue. I want to tell the truth, of course, about the financial damage, the emotional manipulation, all of it. But I also want to say that while she took my money and temporarily my dignity, she failed at taking what really mattered, which is Dad's gesture between us. This, our family, the real one, not the illusion she tried to create. In the end, that is what she could not destroy. Despite her best efforts, I felt a surge of pride for how far Dad had come from the broken man on my couch to someone who could find meaning and even triumph in his painful experience. You know, I said thoughtfully when Mom was sick. She told me something I've been thinking about lately. She said that the measure of a person is not how they handle success, but how they rise after falling. I think she would be pretty proud of how you have risen, Dad. His eyes glistened, but his smile remained steady. She would be proud of both of us, son. As we carried our perfectly grilled steaks inside to the dining table, I reflected on the lessons of the past 18 months. I had learned about the fragility of family bonds, how easily they can be strained by outside forces, but I had also discovered their remarkable resilience when built on a foundation of genuine love and respect. I had seen firsthand how people can be blinded by their own needs and desires, making choices that hurt those closest to them. But I had also witnessed the power of accountability, forgiveness, and the courageous work of rebuilding trust. Most importantly, I had come to understand that family is not defined by blood alone, or by marriage certificates, or by sharing a home. True family is defined by those who stand by you in your darkest moments, who tell you hard truths when necessary, and who welcome you back with open arms when you lose your way. Dad raised his glass for a toast to second chances, but the real kind, the ones you earn through honesty and hard work. To second chances, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. As we enjoyed our meal, I thought about the 4th of July gathering. We were planning a reclaiming of the tradition that had marked our breaking point. This time, the guest list included only those who had supported us through the crisis, people who genuinely cared about our well-being rather than the superficial connections Rebecca had cultivated. The road ahead still held challenges. Dad would need to rebuild his retirement savings. The legal proceedings would continue to require our attention, and the emotional scars would take time to fully heal. But facing those challenges, together with clear eyes and honest communication, made them seem manageable in a way that would have been unimaginable a year ago. As darkness fell and we moved to the living room, Dad picked up a framed photo of Mom that now sat prominently on the mantel. "You know what she would say about all this, do not you?" I smiled, able now to remember Mom with joy rather than just loss. She would say, "We are both too stubborn for our own good, but that is also what saved us." Dad laughed, nodding in agreement, and she would be right. As usual, in the quiet moment that followed, I realized that while we could never recapture the family we had been before Rebecca, before Mom's death, or even before our estrangement, we had created something new and valuable from the pieces. A relationship tempered by adversity, strengthened by forgiveness, and guided by the wisdom that comes only through difficult experience. Life offers no guarantees against loss or betrayal. People will disappoint you, sometimes devastatingly so. But what matters is not the falling down, but the getting back up. Not the breaking, but the rebuilding. Not the wounds inflicted, but the healing that follows. That is the lesson I carry forward from our family's darkest chapter. A truth, hard won, but worth every painful step of the journey. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with a family member after a major betrayal? What helped you through that process? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that broken family bonds can be mended. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that, even in your darkest moments, healing is always possible when you face the truth with courage and compassion.